Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on how to combat human trafficking for sexual exploitation. This is an event which is organized by the Swedish and French embassies. And my name is Renate van der Zee, and I'm your moderator for this afternoon. I'm very pleased to announce that we have about 300 people who've signed up for this webinar. And these are not only people from Holland, but there are also a lot of people from all over the world. And this afternoon we're going to discuss developments within human trafficking for sexual exploitation, and we will also discuss different approaches to solve this serious problem. I will now give the floor to the Swedish ambassador to the Netherlands, Mrs. Annika Markovic.
Thank you very much, Renate, and dear viewers. 2 years ago, on International Women's Day in 2019, the former Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström, together with the French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, agreed on developing a common strategy on how to combat trafficking in human beings for the purpose of sexual exploitation in Europe and in the world. And only 2 weeks ago, the EU foreign ministers also adopted conclusions that reaffirm the EU's commitment to respect, to protect, and to fulfill human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and to stand united in support of the UN human rights system as a cornerstone of its overall policy. And this is really what the fight against trafficking is all about: protecting the fundamental human rights of all individuals, men, women, and children alike, no matter of origin or background. Together, the Netherlands, France, and Sweden have worked side by side in the European Union and internationally to promote universal respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, as stated in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. The Netherlands, France, and Sweden also work closely together to promote women's rights, to fight discrimination and violence against women, and stand up for sexual and reproductive health and rights. This has been a challenging task. Long-running armed conflicts, systematic human rights violations, and persecutions have led to an increase in the number of refugees and internally displaced persons, as well as in irregular migration. Unfortunately, as a result of these circumstances, trafficking for sexual exploitation has increased considerably, leading to human tragedies and slave-like conditions for young girls and boys, even in our own countries. We have also seen how trafficking for sexual exploitation often forms a part of organized crime networks, where it is combined with the smuggling of hard drugs, weapons, and illegal transactions, leading to the financing of terrorism. So it's all interlinked. And this webinar, which is organized in close cooperation between the embassies of Sweden and France in the Netherlands, is our contribution to share knowledge and stimulate a discussion about trafficking in human beings for the purpose of sexual exploitation. We will highlight the links between trafficking and organized crime, and listen to government as well as civil society representatives who work to combat human trafficking and to help the victims of these heinous crimes to a better future. So, I hope that you will find this webinar interesting. I'm sure it will be a very lively discussion, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Annika. And we will start the first part of our conference, and we will discuss human trafficking for sexual exploitation at an international level. We will speak with Conny Rijken, who is a professor human trafficking and globalization at the University of Tilburg. And we will also talk with Joost Klarenbeek, who is a special envoy migration at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But first we will speak with Professor Rijken. To start with, what do we know about the scope of human trafficking for sexual exploitation worldwide, on a worldwide scope?
Yeah, well, it seems to be maybe an easy question, but that's quite a difficult question because we have a really high dark number. But the UNODC, the UN Office for Drugs and Crime, as a biannual report where they give an update. And they have now recently, in January of this year, they have published their newest report, and they have calculated the data of 148 countries with identified victims, and they have calculated 50,000 of victims. Now, well, this is only a tip of the iceberg, of course, but in this 50,000 victims of trafficking, there's half of them are victims of sexual exploitation, half of them are adult women, 20% is young girls, and we know that most often women and girls are trafficked for sexual exploitation. Now, they've also indicated in this report some new trends. And so one of the trends over the last 10-15 years is an enormous increase of minors becoming victim of human trafficking. So they have the number of minors has tripled, and the number of boys is even 5 times as high as it was 15 years ago. Another trend is the use of internet, online, also for recruitment, but also for the provision of services. And we know that also from other research that especially for sexual exploitation. And another trend is actually the increase of the vulnerability of people on the move, so migrants, refugees, that become victim of human trafficking as well.
And you see that human trafficking for sexual exploitation very often occurs within migration flows. Could you explain to us how this works?
Yeah, so there's different forms of this type of the connection between the migration and human trafficking. So first there is a group that leave the country with a debt to their smugglers, for instance, and because they are indebted, they are vulnerable and dependent on their smugglers and easy targeted for exploitative practices. Another group is they have money for only the first leg of the journey, and then while in migration they actually run out of money and then have to accept work or other, for instance, in prostitution, which they otherwise would not accept to make money. And of course, traffickers are there waiting for them to exploit them. Some people, refugees, have left without any means. So what they have there is their children and the clothes they are wearing, and they are also lured into practices of sexual exploitation to make ends meet, and that is what we call survival sex. And we also see that big groups they fall in the hands of criminal networks that are there on the route to abuse those migrants that are increasingly in a vulnerable situation.
So on the way, people are being exploited, and on their way from Africa to Europe, for example. And what are the problems? What is an important problem that can be generated by this flow of?
Yeah, so it's not only along the way, but because we think that people go from A to B, but they sometimes are there for years in between. And also, the problem also exists after they arrive, for instance, in the European Union. So, for instance, in Italy, there is high numbers of sexual exploitation, especially people from Nigeria, but also, for instance, in Greece, people from Afghanistan, and also in the camps within the European Union. Union. So there is many problems that occur also after arrival in the European Union.
So we've been talking about one specific problem. For instance, when for instance somebody's been exploited in Italy and takes refuge and asks for asylum in the Netherlands. There are all kinds of problems which arise. Can you elaborate a little bit on it?
Yeah, so there is, and that is actually a very topical problem at this very moment, where people actually apply for asylum, but also mention that they are a victim of human trafficking, and then there is, for the Netherlands, there is in principle an obligation to protect these people, but based on the Dublin Convention or the Dublin regulation, they're also sent back to Italy, which is the common framework within the European Union, how that works. But you can imagine if the network is still there in Italy, that can create new problems and risk for them as well. Now, in this whole context, but then it becomes maybe a bit very technical, specific and legal, but the District Court of The Hague has asked questions to the Court of Justice of the European Union to give an answer to the question whether or not the practice of sending back people based on the Dublin regulation, whether that is in compliance with EU law. So we're very much looking forward to an answer of the Court of Justice in this regard.
Yeah, because it would be could be totally problematic to send these victims back where they are maybe tracked down by their exploiters again.
Yeah. So there is now two cases, recent cases in the Netherlands, and in one case was indeed also that the victim recognized a member of the trafficking network in the asylum seeker center. So, and we also know from other research that indeed from Italy that there are cells also in two other countries in the European Union, including the Netherlands. So we're well aware of these type of problems.
Do you think there is enough there's enough attention for the problem of human trafficking for sexual exploitation within the migration flows? Are we aware that this is such a great problem?
Yeah, I have the idea that in general at the European level we are aware of these problems. That is also it's also indicated in many research. But what to do about it, and also how it is actually linked to the migration policy, and whether it has also a place in migration policies, that is something that I don't see that much. So, and then if we talk about the externalization of the borders, for instance, and the securitization of the borders in the European Union at large, then that doesn't really reflect this sensitivity for this problem.
Well, there's still a lot to be done.
Absolutely.
We talk a little bit further on the topic of migration with Joost Klarenbeek, your special envoy migration of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You work to combat all forms of human trafficking, but what would you consider to be the percentage of human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation?
Well, that is not easy to say. The lens through which I approach these issues professionally is through getting more control of irregular migration flows. And human trafficking is a big aspect there. From that angle, there are many forms in which people can be exploited, whether sexually, whether they're sent in modern slavery, construction to the mines or whatever. The key thing is that we want to protect those people, prevent it from happening, prosecute if it happens, and ensure that they come back in a safe place. But again, it's the migration context that's leading in my professional outlook.
But what do you see when it comes to human trafficking for sexual exploitation?
Well, it is definitely a big factor, as of course Professor Rijken also mentioned. Before starting this job, I worked for 5 years in Rome, was also very closely involved in migration context there. And there, in those days, and up to 80%, so 8 out of 10, of Nigerian women and girls arriving irregularly in Italy, often via Libya, would find themselves exploited sexually very quickly upon their arrival. And I think many people who, during the holidays, have driven Italian provincial roads and have seen the girls working at the roadside know what I'm talking about. We're talking about 80%. And of course, we will never know how many of those are in the category, as you described, that they started as a customer of a smuggler paying for a service and eventually ending into this situation, or whether they were trafficked from the outset. The important thing is they find themselves in a situation and something has to be done about it. Also because a group from these people will eventually also end up in the Netherlands. We have a regular flow of people from Nigerian women and girls arriving in the Netherlands, requesting asylum, speaking Italian well, and indeed explaining about their history as well, and the present, of course, as a victim of trafficking.
Yeah, and there are several of these flows from Africa.
Well, exactly. This is one of the main routes.
Yeah.
At least, also when you look at those people ending up in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Our efforts are very much focused on West Africa, and Nigeria is very much on top of our list, also in our cooperation projects.
Yeah, you are involved in combating this problem. What is the kind of work the Dutch do when it comes to trying to combat the human trafficking?
Well, my work basically boils down to migration dialogues with the countries of origin and the countries of transit. That's my daily work. And we do development-related projects, actually working to tackle those problems. And those are basically aimed at 3 tracks. The first is prevention. There is, of course, lots of work going on, working on root causes of irregular migration, and the potential to be trafficked, of course, is one of those. We have information campaigns, warning about the risks of irregular trips, including, of course, the aspect of human trafficking. So that's the prevention side. And it's the prosecution side. So we have programs building capacity in countries of origin, in countries of transit, with migration services, with anti-trafficking services. We try to help them in improving legislation. And very important, I can say a few words more about that. We work on operational cooperation between police services, public prosecution services along the entire route, and make sure that we can that crimes can be prosecuted as they should.
That's cooperation between the Dutch, the Italians, and the Nigerians.
In this case, yes. Of course, there are several routes. This is a very important one. And yes, we do have set up and finance a system where we have liaison police officers, liaison public prosecutors from the Netherlands, based in Rome. We have prosecutors, policemen from Nigeria, based in Rome, and obviously the Italians. So in this triangle, we managed to do operational cooperation, battling these traffickers and their networks along the entire migration route.
And is it? That's of course great that there's a cooperation because when it comes to global human trafficking, it's very important that countries cooperate together. And do you see any effects of this cooperation? Is it? Are you able to do more than you would be?
Yes, we do. We do see absolutely. We do see results. Much of it, of course, is part of police investigation, so they're not giving me all the numbers, but they're very. All 3 sides are very happy with the cooperation and basically the effects that they have on the networks. One very particular example that has come from this cooperation is that when the Netherlands was a member of the Security Council, we managed to have 6 main human traffickers active in and around Libya to be put on the UN sanctions list.
And what does it mean when they're put on the UN sanctions list?
It means a travel ban, and it means that their foreign assets will have to be frozen worldwide.
Okay.
And it gives, of course, an extra legal basis to those wanting to prosecute those people.
So the 6 big bosses of the trafficking, they are restricted in being able to travel, and their money in foreign banks is frozen.
Yes, and those listings we were able to make because of the operational information that came from this cooperation between Nigeria, between Italy, and the Netherlands, basically getting the information needed to prove that a listing on this UN list was doable.
Well, that sounds really good, but in reality, will it really work out that way? Because everywhere there's corruption, and it sounds really good, but do you think it will really work out that way?
It will definitely help.
Okay.
Yes, it will be complicated. We all know that. We are looking at highly organized international criminal networks, and which means that we have to work as international and as highly organized as they are, or at least a bit more.
Yes. Well, that's very, very well put. So there's another aspect you mentioned that is prevention. Yeah. You were talking about prevention by, I think you told me on the phone before we spoke, that prevention by people who went through the whole process, because road signs telling people how dangerous it is are not so effective. Do you feel that these kind of, like having people talk about their own story, do you feel that this is effective in persuading people not to take the trip?
I think so. It is very hard to measure, of course. It's very hard to measure who decided on the basis of what not to make the trip. What we definitely do know, as you say, that big road signs saying do not make this trip, it is dangerous, probably do not convince people. Whereas people who went through the experience and actually sharing their personal experience, that does make an impression. And we have to realize that for those people participating in such projects, it's a huge step. Because, well, first of all, they have gone through this horrendous experience in many ways. Then they have returned, which is also not easy. It might be that your entire village has helped you finance your trip. And then you come back, with a very dreadful story.
Yeah, it's horrible.
You have you may feel that you have let people down. You may have let your family down. Of course, there's the shame associated with it. So it's a big step that these people are taking.
Yeah.
So when you find these people and they're able to do this in a very convincing way, I'm sure that will make a difference when people listen to it. At the same time, if you look at the size of the country and the potential numbers of people you have to address, it's a small bit, but small bits do help.
Yeah, of course. We have some questions coming in. One question for Professor Rijken. Why do you think that the problem of human trafficking, and specifically the trafficking for sexual exploitation of minors, has grown?
Well, that is a difficult question. Well, we know that within the migration flows, for instance, there is a high number of minors as well. So 50% of all the people on the move is
50%?
Yeah, those are minors. So and if we know that the people on the move are increased vulnerable to exploitative practices, then it's logical that part of that is or can be explained in that way. But there's also a growing attention for minors that become victims. So it's also the question is, of course, well, is there indeed an increase, or do we see it more? Because if we know it more, then we are aware of, and then that also is on the increase. So in that sense, it can also be a positive, that we are more aware of it. And minors are, of course, much more easy targeted. And as I mentioned before, the use of internet, the online, the way how people are tracked. Of course, the minors are constantly, or at least in the Western world, not everywhere, but online, and they are much more easily targeted online as well. So these are all factors that explain this huge increase in the minors.
Yeah, it's also, of course, it's much easier to find people for sexual exploitation on the internet, and also to offer them.
Yeah, and of course the minors, they of course also try things if they are young adults. And they want to have experiences and excitement as well, and that can go wrong as well. And even if we can, as adults, maybe oversee the consequences, but for minors that is much more difficult.
Yeah,
to oversee.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question for Joost Klarenbeek. If you want to do prevention when it comes to human trafficking, isn't it a better idea to do something about poverty?
Absolutely. I mean, the very beginning is the root, battling the root causes of irregular migration, including, of course, human trafficking. Yes, absolutely. And this is, of course, the main thing what we do as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Development Cooperation. We have huge programs of often specific, both the choice of our focus countries and regions and countries, and also within countries, the regions where we prefer to work, with a very strong focus on promoting, well, economic growth, but especially for youth, economic opportunity, self-reliance, and quite simply, livelihoods and economic perspective. And yes, that is the main thing, but that is of course a long-term project that will take decades. We've been working on it decades. We're increasing, we're targeting. So yes, I fully agree with the person who put up this question. This is what should make a difference in the long run. Yeah. But of course that doesn't help that poor Nigerian girl in Italy.
Yeah, so in the short run, a very good practice is cooperation between different countries on the level of prosecution. Sorry, and I've understood that the way you work with cooperation in prosecution, it has been so successful that you're also trying it out on different routes now.
Yes, we have extended this program now also to include Spain, Madrid. We are also thinking of maybe having a Nigerian prosecutor here in The Hague, also as a direct connection to the international organization here, Eurojust, Europol. So yes, that is something that we were very happy with, and that hopefully is also part of the proof of the success of what we've been trying out in Italy.
Do you think, Professor Rijken, that there's enough effort being put into cooperation on a global level?
On the global level, yeah, well, enough, then the answer is no. There's never enough, and it can always be more. But I think the key is here, and also the way forward is cooperation. But we also know that cooperation is very, very difficult, also in very concrete situations, that it often depends on the context that law enforcement has, and the good context. So, and I think the Netherlands has done very well in this, to really have a person set in Rome, a prosecutor seconded in Rome, to also establish these contacts and to maintain these contacts. But you can imagine that it is very time-consuming. It's also very costly. But I think that this is the way forward, and I think we can even use more the expertise from, for instance, Europol, Eurojust, also to come together and to get to know each other better, because then criminal cooperation works better. Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for answering our questions, Professor Rijken and Mr. Klarenbeek. It's been very insightful, and thank you so much for coming to the Swedish Embassy. We're going on to the second part of our conference. Welcome to the second part of our webinar on how to combat human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. And during this part we will talk about measures at the national level. We will talk with guests from Holland and from Sweden and France. And from Holland we have Mr. Maarten Smidts. He is head of the Department of Organized crime. Sorry. Head of the Department of Organized Crime of the Dutch Ministry of Justice. And we have Mr. Shamir Ceuleers of the Center Child Trafficking, Human Trafficking. From Sweden we have Per-Anders Sunesson, Ambassador Against Human Trafficking. And from France we have Jean-Claude Brunet, Ambassador for Transnational Criminal Threats. And I'd like to start with you, Mr. Smidts. You work for the Dutch Ministry of Justice. The Dutch see the human trafficking for sexual exploitation as a very serious problem. Nevertheless, a few years ago we saw in Holland the number of trials going down. There were not so many people being prosecuted for human trafficking for sexual exploitation anymore, whereas the problem remained the same. Can you explain to us how you are now trying to solve that problem?
I think the National Reporter of Trafficking Human Beings in the Netherlands also stressed that in all his reports the last decade that there's a downward trend, and I think the current government made it one of its priorities. We have a broad government program, trafficking together against trafficking of human beings, and it is being constructed together with all departments, municipalities, NGOs. So it's really a broad program, and for here I would like to answer your question to focus on 2 points. The first one is the integrated approach, and the second one is stepping up the criminal justice approach. To start with the first, I think we are very keen on the integrated approaches. So we think you have to focus on a whole system approach. So it's about detecting, taking care of the victims, prosecuting. That all together makes it a good system. And for the past years, we have invested a lot to bring all partners together and make sure everybody cooperates to make sure that you are able to prevent, to detect, to prosecute. I think that's one of the key elements in our approach. And then the second. So
it's sort of a holistic approach.
Yeah, a whole government approach.
Yeah.
So to say, or a whole government. I think the NGOs are also part of it. So it's a whole system approach, so to say. Yeah.
And were you able to sort of change the fact that less and less prosecutions were taking place?
Well, then I want to go on to the second point, and that's the stepping up the criminal justice approach. I think we have been able to invest a lot in stepping up there. There's more money going to the police, so we have more detectives.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that's, I think, for the prosecution side, it's an important point. It's one of the focus points in our the security agenda of the police. So the police is one of the priorities of the police, so that's really important.
It became a priority again.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the...
because that's really important that you have a priority within the police, because human trafficking actually isn't a very rewarding crime to investigate.
Absolutely.
Because you need so much time, it's such a hidden crime, and you need so much time to investigate it. It's rare that a human trafficking case comes to the police itself.
Exactly, so that's why you need detectives to go after the cases. The cases aren't coming to the police. You have to hunt the cases, and that's one of the problems of THB, yeah, absolutely. But also we invested in recognizing THB for police officers because it's really
THB?
difficult. Trafficking of human beings.
Okay.
Sorry. Trafficking of human beings. So we invested a lot in knowledge with police officers so they recognize it because it's difficult to recognize as such.
What makes it so difficult to recognize it?
It's hidden. It's hidden. So it's they do everything to hide it. As well, the victims do that as the perpetrators. So they both hide it. So it's really difficult for the police to find out. Victims deny first that they are a victim, and then after a while, the police officers are able to find out that they have to deal with victims.
Yeah, that's a great problem, that victims often deny that they are victims.
Yeah.
And in
So that's why you have to train police officers so they are able to interrogate or to recognize the fact that they have to dealing with victims.
And it requires, of course, interrogation skills.
Yeah.
So
And it needs a specialized branch within the police. We have that. We have a specialized branch within the police who can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And another question which is interesting is, do you think that in the last 10, 20 years, Dutch attitudes towards human trafficking within the sex trade have changed?
I think so. I think it's always been pretty high on the political agenda, especially sexual exploitation has been high on the political agenda. I think the awareness within the Dutch society that this is a big problem is getting more and more apparent. I think to notice here, maybe it's good that Comensa started.
Comensa is the organization for
victims
Yep.
of and they started an awareness campaign, Open Your Eyes. And I think what we can see is that it is really a context-based phenomenon. So we have sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, criminal exploitation. You see that all these different in all these different areas, exploitation is taking place, and we're getting more and more aware of that. And it also stresses the fact that we have to work together with all these organizations that are playing a role in the approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see slowly things have developed in the awareness also of the Dutch public. For 10 years ago, the red light district of Amsterdam was something which was regarded as something which would always exist. And now there are discussions going on. Is it really something that should always exist, or maybe should we deal with it in a different way? Do you think that these discussions are helpful when it comes to the problem of human trafficking?
I think it's helpful that we're becoming more aware that there are always cases where people are there involuntarily, and that we should stay focused on that, and that there are victims there as well. And I think that we are aware of that. The police is aware of that. So I think it absolutely helps with getting more awareness, and also getting more people prosecuted, because these are victims and there are perpetrators behind that, and we need to get those.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Smidts. I continue with Shamir Ceuleers of the Center Child Trafficking, Human Trafficking. You've been all over the news, all over the Dutch news this week because of research you've done, or your organization has done, into the perpetrators of human trafficking for sexual exploitation. Can you tell us a little bit about what came out of the research?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I think it's important to mention that we did this research, this study, in the same spirit as Mr. Smith mentioned, because we did it, we were asked by the National Police to do this research. Also because the Dutch National Rapporteur for years has been saying we don't know enough about who these human traffickers are, and we're talking about human trafficking of Dutch domestic sex trafficking, basically. So what we did is we looked at 25 criminal cases of human traffickers, and we looked at who they are and how they work. And what we found is that it's a very young group of human traffickers. On average, they're 26 years old, but often also younger, and they have a troubled background. meaning that they've been in contact with healthcare organizations when they were young. They had an unstable upbringing. They have a lot of debts, but also they've been involved in criminal activities before. That's one of the things that were found. But the most striking thing is when we're looking at how they operate. We see that from the moment they first establish contact with their victim, it can only take a week before they end up being exploited, and that's in half the cases of all the victims that we found.
Well, that's really amazing.
Yes.
Because what we knew from the past is that often these young perpetrators take a long time to groom their victims. But now it seems that it has totally changed, and they can just in a week's time move somebody into prostitution.
Yeah. Sometimes within a day. We've also seen that. Yes. But you have this old stereotype, but it's still relevant in some of the cases where it takes months and they let their victim fall in love with them and stuff like that. But in half of the cases, this is not true. They use violence or the threat of violence, but also sextortion is a big thing that I think also can cause this short period of time. It can explain it because basically when they get hold of nude images or videos, they basically say either you do exactly as I tell you, and you have sex with these men, or I'm going to spread these pictures around to your school, to your friends and family, and everyone will know about it. And I think one other thing that is also very interesting is the demand side. If I may, what we found in this study is that when we're looking at the underage victims, which the Dutch National Rapporteur say is the biggest and most invisible group of victims of human trafficking in the Netherlands, our study shows that these underage victims had to have sex with an estimate around 20 buyers per victim. And these buyers, they're the oxygen behind this whole evil and criminal business model of human trafficking in the Netherlands.
Yeah, so it is very important to do something about the buyers of sex of minors.
Yes, and as my predecessor mentioned, this holistic approach is very, very important. And when the government published their plans 4 years ago to tackle THB or human trafficking in the Netherlands, we were surprised and honestly a bit disappointed that it didn't include any initiative to tackle these buyers of the biggest and most invisible group, because the estimates are 1,300 underage girls who become sexually exploited each year, and 97% of them remain invisible. 97.
So if you sort of, I read that if you count that down to the schools, there will be about 2 or 3 girls in every high school that are being exploited for sexual.
Yes, yes. And so one of the exactly that's an estimate.
Well,
but yes,
that's
to make
so
it concrete, it is shocking. But coming back to those buyers, so 4 years ago we were a bit disappointed, but right now I can say. We're working successfully with the team of Mr. Smidts to tackle these buyers.
So, like 4 years ago, nobody thought about tackling the buyers.
Yes.
And in 4 years' time, the Dutch ideas about what to do about sexual exploitation of minors have developed into the direction of we really have to address the buyers.
Right, and this is also in the spirit of the program, which is called Together and Against Sex Trafficking. And what Mr. Smidts and his team did, they opened up and they say, we need to do this together. If you have good ideas, let's do that together. And also, Parliament was very actively involved in asking, listen, we need to tackle this demand side. And right now, we're waiting for a law to be tabled at Parliament, which will, for the first time, include better measures to deal with these buyers who buy sex of underage victims of human trafficking. Because by law right now, it only specifically prohibits those clients who buy sex from 16 and 17-year-old. Not saying that below, when you're younger, it's illegal, but there is no difference between a swim teacher who sexually abuses his pupil and a man who buys sex from a 14-year-old. And this needs to change, and right now it's looking very positive. So we've been working together very successfully with the team of Mr. Smidts, and we're very happy with that.
Well, that's
times are changing.
Yeah, times are changing. That's really good. So to switch to, I could talk for hours about this with you, but we have to switch to another subject. The influence of Corona on human trafficking. Yes. Is it possible to say something about that?
Yeah, well, I think it was around 2 months ago that we published another report, and we looked at the webcam industry. And the reason that we wanted to look at this industry, because we know from figures from the United States, for example, that a lot of sex trafficking has gone online because it's very difficult to have physical meetings. And the second thing is that we know that this is a $1 billion or euro industry. But in the Netherlands, there was very little known between the question, does this webcam sex industry include human trafficking? So we did two things. We had interviews with police officers, the specialized police officer that were mentioned earlier, and we looked at cases here. Were there any verdicts concerning human trafficking in this industry? And what we saw is that, yes, there was a case. There were several cases that involved human trafficking and sexual exploitation in this area. And right now, one of the recommendations to the state secretary who's responsible for human trafficking is that they would actually include their proactive online searches and investigations into sexual exploitation, because this is a whole area. I mean, several speakers have mentioned the dark number. The dark number is far too great, and as was mentioned before, investigating human trafficking is very difficult. So we need to look at sectors and industries which have been operating under the radar very successfully, financially speaking, and I think it's even crucial to increase those online efforts when it comes to sexual exploitation during Corona, because a lot of it has gone online.
Yeah, and what we see is that prostitution is going more and more online.
Yeah.
And yet there hasn't been so much effort of the police online for online searches. And do you think this is going to change in the future? And how would it be? How could it change?
Yeah, I think maybe I can
Sure.
answer
Yeah.
that question maybe even better. I think what Mr. Ceuleers said is absolutely true. You see this change. You see that Corona made the fact that online and digitalization of this phenomenon excelled.
Yep.
And I think that the police.
So human trafficking online became bigger and bigger because of Corona?
We think that. We don't have the exact numbers now, or we don't have the facts, but that's one of what we think. That's what we're researching right now. And I think the digitalization fact is the police and the prosecuting office in the Netherlands are very aware of the fact, and the state secretary is aware of the fact. So we are one of the focus point for the future strategy of this. The near future strategy is digitalization. How to deal with the fact that it's going as fast as Mr. Ceuleers said it is. That's something we are really keen on combating and fighting.
Yeah.
Look how to be effective in investigating and prosecuting.
Because also the change that you mentioned when it comes to human traffickers, that they are very young,
Yes.
and that they are using sextortion. This change was only possible because of online developments.
Yes.
I mean, in the past, you had to be a guy to be able to dominate people. It was very important to be a physical presence in order to exploit women in the sex industry. Nowadays, all you need is a computer, it seems.
Yeah,
exactly. And the police, it would be unfair to point only to the police, because as I mentioned before, in half of the cases of the victims that we found, if from the moment they first made contact to the moment of exploitation, this can take one or a couple of days or up to a week, half of the cases, then the police is only part of the solution. So we need to increase our efforts to work together with NGOs, together with healthcare institutions, because we are all responsible.
The platforms?
Exactly, and the platforms. And with this, I think for the first time, the government has really increased efforts to work together with NGOs and companies and stuff like that. And we need to continue that. Elections are coming up, but also the corona crisis is also an economic crisis. So we're really hoping and expecting that the next government will also continue to step up the fight against sexual exploitation. But one of the things that I wanted to add when it comes to technology and social media platforms, technology is not only a weapon for the perpetrators, it is also part of the solution. And one of the things that we just started working together with the Department of Justice is the online outreach program, is to proactively find potential victims and help them and redirect them to an anonymous chat, for example, that we have here in the Netherlands. And that's already operating for more than 10 years, very successfully so, but the dark number is still too great. And during the corona crisis, these victims just increased. Mm-hmm. They increased, and more than a quarter of them were younger than 15. I mean, these are girls, these are children.
That's so worrying.
So just to reiterate, I mean, working together with the government is very important for healthcare institutions, NGOs, like the one that I work for. But this needs to be a continuous effort, not only for 4 years, but for many years to come.
Okay. Maybe add something on a positive note,
please.
Because we
positive
were,
note, please.
We started our conversation about the downward trend, but I think the positive note is that since last year the amount of perpetrators brought to justice went up again. So the police was able to bring more people to the prosecuting office.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the positive things of the investments we made, the working together in this area. So there are also positive things to notice here.
Yeah, and that's sure. And there are also nowadays there are more cases brought to trial of buyers of sex of minors, but the verdicts are still very often very low.
We're not there yet. We have to work. But that's also why we invest in the police, so the quality is better and the quality of the cases brought to justice is better. So we're not there yet, but there are also glimpses of hope.
Well, I am very glad to hear and I'm very glad to hear that there are all kinds of developments going on in Holland. We turn a little bit more to the north right now, to Sweden. Our next guest is Mr. Per Anders Sunesson, the Swedish ambassador for the fight against human trafficking. Hello, he joins us via Zoom. What are the issues, Mr. Sunesson, that the Swedes face when it comes to human trafficking?
Well, good afternoon, Renate, and good afternoon, colleagues. First of all, I don't want to sail under false flag.
I can hear him.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I said good afternoon, everyone, colleagues, dear friends. First of all, I don't want to sail under false flags. My term as ambassador ended on the 31st of December last year, so I'm no longer ambassador at large, but I'm still very much involved in these issues. Having said that, I also want to thank the French and the Swedish Embassy for arranging this very important and timely event. It's always very interesting and important to have this international dialogue and exchange, because we can always learn from each other. And at the end of the day, we always want the same thing, to stop human trafficking, to enhance human rights, stop violence against women, and enhance gender equality. So it's really good to talk to each other and learn from each other. And regarding your question, Renate, what are the issues Sweden is facing when it comes to human trafficking? Was that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Well, Sweden, like most countries, have people trafficked to Sweden to be exploited for different reasons, and we have pretty small numbers, and I'll get back to that. But I think that we are facing what every country are facing, the consequences of COVID-19, with the World Bank's estimate that more than 150 million more people will end up in extreme poverty. There will be a lot more victims for human trafficking, that's for sure. And of course, we need to do everything we can to catch the perpetrators. But I must say, Sweden has low numbers when it comes to conviction rates on human traffickers, and that's a problem globally. I don't see any country have high numbers on that. And the turnaround of human trafficking is $150 billion every year. So we really need to focus also on reducing demand for people to be trafficked.
Well, yeah, we were talking about demand, addressing demand of buyers of sex of minors here in Holland. The Swedes have gone a little bit further, and they have criminalized all buying of sex. And that is about 21 years ago that this happened. And can you explain, I mean, that's quite an extreme measure. Can you explain how you came to set this law into motion?
Gladly. The law came into force 1st of January 1999, and it's criminalized to buy sex, but not to sell sex in Sweden. And the discussion before this law came into force was really about men's violence against women and about gender inequality in the Swedish society. The issue of prostitution was not really a topic that was being discussed. But the women's movement in Sweden, they kind of pushed the Swedish government in front of themselves, saying you need to do something about men's violence against women. So the government did what governments do. They put together a governmental inquiry to look into the structures behind men's violence against women and gender inequality in our society. And it was during this governmental inquiry that the issue prostitution came up, because they could see that there was a lot of violence going on against women in prostitution. And it was also to 99.9% men using their financial power to buy sex from young women. So the issue of prostitution came up, and the women's movement once again said, well, we need to look into this. The government put together another governmental inquiry on prostitution, and they did a thorough job. They interviewed very many of those who were in prostitution and also the sex buyers, men. And guess what? When they met the girls who were in prostitution, they did not meet strong entrepreneur women saying, you know, this is the choice I made for myself in Sweden. I can become pretty much what I want, bus driver, doctor, teacher, but I choose to be in prostitution. No, almost everyone of the women they interviewed had a documented history of sexual abuse, drug problems during their upbringing. These were young women with low self-esteem, thinking that they were not worth anything else than providing sex for men. And then, you know, looking at the interviews with the sex buyers, it was like, well, you know, I'm a man and I have my sexual needs and I don't have a girlfriend and someone needs to take care of it, or I'm married, but my wife don't want to do what I want to do. So
the law was put together from a point of view of gender equality. But I mean, how can criminalizing buyers of sex, how can it help against human trafficking?
So I was coming there. Yes. So this was the discussion, and people were saying, you know, we don't want prostitution in our society, and other people said, you know, prostitution is the oldest profession ever, and if you prohibit it, it's just going to go underground. It's going to make it more dangerous for those who are in prostitution.
Yes, that's what we think in Holland.
Yeah, those were the arguments, and it was pretty much 50-50. We could have taken the German, the Netherlands path. We were very close to that, but there was a majority to criminalize buying sex in Sweden. So it was decided. And then the next discussion was, okay, should we criminalize both the buyer and the seller? Some people said yes, and other people said no. Remember the results. These women, they are not criminals. They should be offered help instead of being locked up. So to answer your question, this law, the signal from the government that buying sex is not okay, has really changed the mindset of most Swedish people. So today there are very few who are asking for women in prostitution. And that's the connection to human trafficking. There's a low demand for women in prostitution. And the Swedish police and Interpol, they are saying in their reports that Sweden is almost a dead market for human trafficking, for sexual exploitation, just because the demand is low.
But here in Holland, we are critical of the Swedish model because we think that it drives prostitution underground. And that could make it more dangerous for the women and men in prostitution. So, this is. I
mean, we have more than 20 years of experience now when we evaluated the law, and there are absolutely no statistics, no research that supports that theory that it would make it more dangerous. Actually, we have not had one violent crime, not a killing of someone in prostitution since the law came into force. And the Swedish police actually said this law made it more safe for the women who still are in prostitution. Because like I said, they changed the mindset. Very few thinks it's okay. A sex buyer in Sweden today, he is very careful not to make a fuss because he don't want the attention of the police, because he knows if he does something to the women he's buying sex from, the police will arrest him and not the ladies buying sex from. So it was really a shift of power.
But are there aspects of this law that, well, if you could do it again, if you could implement this law again, would there be things that you would give more attention to?
A very important part of the legislation is the part with support to the person who is in prostitution. This could be regulated in a better way. I think the French law is the Swedish law 2.0, a much better version of the Swedish law. And I'm sure that my colleague, Ambassador Jean-Claude Brunet, will say a few words about the French legislation. But yes, I think we should regulate the support to women even better in the Swedish law. It works and we give support, but we could do it even better. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Per Anders Sunesson. Talking about the French, we have Jean-Claude Brunet, the French ambassador for transnational criminal threats. I'm very pleased that you are here and can tell us a little bit more about the French approach. But first, I also want to ask you, what are the issues that France is facing when it comes to human trafficking for sexual exploitation?
Yeah, thank you, Renate, and good afternoon to everyone, and greetings from Paris. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. We miss Paris.
And I would very much like my colleague from Sweden, Ambassador Per Anders Sunesson, thank our two embassies, the Swedish and the French embassies, and our Dutch colleagues for this great opportunity to share our experience on a very important subject. And responding to your question, Renate, I would very much indicate that like our first speaker, Professor Rijken, has underlined, we are really witnessing worldwide a growing global problem of trafficking in human beings, as it is documented year by year, after year by the EU, by OSCE, and also very much UNODC with also the very recent report. And we see that there is among the victims many women, young girls and boys, as it was already said, that are particularly affected by the growing link between sexual exploitation with extremely violent and organized crime networks. And this has also been mentioned by our Dutch colleagues. These networks are more and more also linked to the smuggling of migrants from Africa, especially, but also other regions. And these trends, precisely, we have noted them very much in France, and particularly over the last 10 years. And with the difficulties, since you are asking particularly, what are the main issues is faced with this trends, we have a difficulty for identifying the victims, getting them to voluntarily testify, to go to the authorities and testify. And without that, we are not able to better help and protect them. And a particular challenge is specifically, as I mentioned, the dimension of the fact that more than 2/3 of the victims are women and young girls, and also the transnational aspect of the organized crime networks. And our Dutch colleagues have mentioned that also. It's very important to cooperate to fight these transnational networks.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the French have also this holistic action plan, like the Dutch, to combat human trafficking? Can you tell us a little bit about the French approach?
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed, it's very interesting to see that we are following the same patterns in our interministerial approaches, and indeed we have in France adopted in 2014 a holistic, action-oriented interministerial approach to faced with this growing challenge as I just described, and also really because it became a very clear governmental priority to fight this threat to fundamental human rights. And we saw that we needed absolutely to do this approach concretely, work better together between the ministries, also the national level and the local level in the département, to keep up with our international commitments. And in particular, of course, the UN protocol, but also the Convention of the Council of Europe against the trafficking in persons. And so the Council of Europe, the action plan is really focused on the holistic approaches to start with prevention, education also, because we were also talking about the children and the minors. This is very, very important, minors being involved in sexual exploitation. And this key issue of identification of victims, where a lot of players in the interministerial work can do more. And so identifying victims in order to be able to be better protecting them. And of course, law enforcement, the penal chain, prosecution and dismantling of criminal networks is a key priority. And finally, also in the action plan, the development of partnerships with the civil society, because we saw that we needed to work the government more with the victims' rights associations to really give them a specific role to help out the government and create confidence and priorities. As our colleagues have said before me, we also very see the special focus necessary on the children. And as I mentioned, so the association work at the local level with all the partners, and the strategy that we develop is developed in Paris, but also in the departments. And I wanted to mention also we have a specific challenge, as I mentioned, to bring the victims to testify. because, as it has been said, they are threatened by these very violent organized crime networks. And, sometimes these networks threaten also their relatives, and they take their ID cards and passports. And so it makes it very, very difficult to engage and to get their testimony.
So
the law...
When it comes to the victims, to make them more safe and to help them, the French have changed their law in 2015, which decriminalized prostitution for a great part. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, yeah. So indeed, the law of 2016 that my Swedish colleague mentioned is an important step within the strategy, within the interministerial strategy. And its aim is really following these actually three approaches, three main objectives, I mean. The first two are indeed to protect the victims of sexual exploitation. The second is to start to work on the demand side, as in the Swedish law. And the third, which relates to this new change, fundamental change of approach, is the communication and prevention aspect. So to say that, as my Swedish colleague mentioned, for the Swedish law, it's a process. So this law is a start, and it's necessary to change the minds. So these, and we definitely would like to share the experience that we gained together with our partners. What I can say is that this 2016 law is, of course, more recent than the Swedish law. So we have less experience so far, but still, 2016, we have experience of 4 years. And what I can tell you is that we saw a positive effect by the trend of the street prostitution going down. We can see that in these 4 years, we had 5,000 verbalizations and fines imposed. And so year by year, around 1,000. You could see that there is only few repeated offenses. So there is an educational effect already. I would like to indicate the protection, and as my Swedish colleague mentioned, this very new dimension that we wanted to introduce is particularly to help the people in prostitution to be first better perceived by the society. Because I can tell you, in my country, before that law, we are still in a situation where our laws were treating the people in prostitution in a way of penalizing, the solicitation in public area, on the street. It was still an offense. Yeah. So we wanted to change the situation from this point to a situation under this new law where we will give full possibility to protect the victims and not to penalize them at all, of course, but to
Mr. Brunel, we have to
protect them.
We have to keep track of the time. We have to keep track of the time. So I have to sort of finish these questions. I think it's very interesting to see what in the future will happen in France. There is a comment from Mark Boekwijd at the City of Amsterdam. He says the City of Amsterdam and the Organization of European Forum on Urban Security are currently setting up a cooperation with other EU cities to exchange practices and learn how we can become more effective in the prevention of trafficking. They would like to invite experts from Sweden and France to join this work. So it would be a great opportunity to talk a little bit longer about the changes in the law.
Renate, if I may just very briefly to indicate that the particularity is that it's not just to protect the victims, but to give them the possibility, if they engage with the program of the government, to get out of the prostitutional system. And so far we had about 400 victims that benefited from this very thorough program to help them to find a new life and to get the support necessary to get out of the prostitutional system. And we definitely would like, together with Sweden and other partners internationally, to work together with the Netherlands and in the international aspects of mobilizing the efforts to implement the international norms. And we run programs to help Western African states, but also the southeast of Europe. And we are part in the international campaign Blue Heart. And this will be a priority for the next UN meetings, where we'd like very much to pool our efforts together, Sweden, France, and the Netherlands.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Brune. We have to go back to some questions which have entered, because we have 10 minutes left. So I'm sorry to be very cruel and cut you off a little bit. There is a question from Elise Toon from the organization for Children's Rights, Child 10, I think I read here. How are you ensuring child rights-based approach in your work to end trafficking in your country? This is a question for our Dutch guests. Maybe Mr. Ceuleers, you could answer this question?
Well, thank you for that question. I think it will give me an opportunity to shed some light on something that we haven't discussed yet. But in 2018, we published a report on why underage victims of sexual exploitation do not press charges. As my colleague said, they don't just go up to the police and say, "Hey, I'm a victim." And nothing revolutionary, but important nevertheless. There were a couple of reasons that they mentioned. They were ashamed. They were afraid of their perpetrator and the network, and they didn't trust the police. And in the same spirit of the governmental program, Together Against Trafficking, what we're now doing is running a pilot together with the public prosecutors and the national police to stand behind that victim and invest in security. So looking at what we can do to protect it better. From a study that we published this week, it shows that 1/3 of the cases, the human trafficker still is able to have contact with the victim after the exploitation has ended. So this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for the police to get these perpetrators behind bars. So we're looking at innovative measures to help them to press charges, to trust the police.
It's really difficult for minors to press charges, and we need an extra effort.
Yes, and especially in the beginning, they don't see healthcare workers or the police as their friends coming there to help them. No, they see them as their enemy, and they don't trust them. And so we're helping them step by step, together with the police, together with the public prosecutor, and together with the team of Mr. Smidts at the Department of Justice to increase efforts to help them offer security, safeguard their rights, and bring justice.
Yeah, because often these minors that have been sexually exploited, they have been so brainwashed by their traffickers that they really don't see themselves as victims.
They don't.
And this requires also another approach by the police who is interrogating them.
Yes, and they're very much willing to work together with us and other professionals to see what is possible, how to increase efforts, how to increase cooperation with healthcare officials or psychologists that are actually going to participate in interrogations behind the scenes to help these victims to feel safe when they share their stories.
I think this is tremendously important as we see that the amount of underage victims is growing.
Yes.
Maybe we need a special police force to address these minors. What do you think, Mr. Smidts?
Well, I think there's already a lot of knowledge within the police department how to interrogate. Interrogate is maybe
it's the wrong term.
No, it's the wrong term, but to see
to get them to share their story.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. To have a safe space where they can share the story, and then so I think that knowledge is there within the police office, but we can always step up. We can always improve. So so better knowledge, better facilitations. You can always step up. But I think within the police is doing a really good job in this.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Well, thank you all very much for contributing to this discussion. Monsieur Brunet from France, Mr. Sunesson from Sweden, thank you so much. Mr. Smidts and Mr. Ceuleers from Holland. We're coming towards the end of this webinar. For some concluding words, I would like to give the floor to the French ambassador, Monsieur Louis Vassy. And to conclude this webinar about how to combat human trafficking for sexual exploitation, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Louis Vassy. He is the French ambassador to the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your very able moderation of this panel today, this webinar. I'd like really to just thank everyone who participated here on site at the Swedish residence, our teams at the French and Swedish embassies, and of course everyone that has been following us online. I'm really extremely proud that our two countries, France and Sweden, have taken leadership in working at the international level and at the European level to tackle this issue of human trafficking. As has been explained, I really think it's not any crime, the crime of human trafficking. It's really something that touches deep down into issues pertaining to human dignity. And it has been mentioned the common work we've done with the Netherlands at the UN Security Council to list and target human traffickers. I think that happened and took momentum after we saw these horrible scenes in Libya of people basically being sold in markets, and that rose the awareness of the gravity and really the lack of any moral standards of people that engage in these activities. I really hope in that regard that the new authorities in Libya, in the west of Libya, will be able to tackle that very important issue, which unfortunately they have failed to do in the last few years. So there is this grave issue of human dignity that we need that makes it a moral duty in a way for our countries to work on this, to tackle the issue of human trafficking. And of course there is also a very basic security issue. We are talking about a traffic that handles billions of euros. So we estimate around 150 billion euros a year. So that of course feeds into criminal networks that we also need to push back against. In a sense, what I was really impressed by today was the fact that we were able to look at concrete solutions all over the scope at the level of very local police activity and the work of the judicial, also with the NGOs and the associations that work with victims, and up to, as I mentioned, the UN Security Council. And I think that shows that there is a place for international action, very local action on the ground, and in between work for our national authorities and work at the European level. And it's only by pulling together our energy of states, energy of NGOs and local actors that we'll be able to go in the right direction. I would also like to say that, of course, human trafficking concerns a wide range of issues, but it's fair to say that it's a very gender-biased issue where women are the main and the majority of victims, specifically when we deal with prostitution. And in that regard, I think that the work we are doing in this area also enters in the realm of our broader engagement in what we call in France our feminist diplomacy, launched by Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian and his colleagues at the Women's Rights Ministries. We are really proud that in June 2021 we'll be gathering the Generation Equality Forum in France. There too, our three countries, France, Sweden and the Netherlands, have been taking leadership roles. This will be one major occasion to advance the agenda of women's rights, and I'd like to mention that our countries have taken upon a leadership role in specific activity. The Netherlands joined the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership. Sweden has joined the Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights, and France has joined the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Rights, which is a top priority of French diplomacy at the multilateral and in level and in our bilateral contacts. So with that, I really want to thank everyone and say how glad I am to have been able to participate in these debates today. Congratulate everyone, and I hope that from here we'll be able to continue moving forward in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Louis Vassy, Ambassador of France in Netherlands. And thank you all for watching this conference on how to combat human trafficking for sexual exploitation. We really hope that you have gained some new insights this afternoon, and also that we've been able to inspire you to continue the fight against this very serious crime. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.